So hello everyone. I see some people already left, so I'm trying to keep this short. Obviously, you're running out of patience. First, unrelated stuff. This is when you visit a conference, a developer conference in Wrocław, and they assign you a hotel room. This is my actual hotel room number. It's the color of the interior design. Well, basically, it's not a totally good idea because the bathroom is completely black, and they have the light switches also completely black, which means that when you want to switch on the light, you have no idea where the switches are. So that's probably the 404, which stands for. So another thing which is slightly related to my talk is this comic which was sent to me by one of my Russian colleagues about itchy feet in Germany, crossing an intersection with a red traffic light, and the German guy saying, "Oh, excuse me, the walking light is still red." He says, "Oh man, there's no one around." And the German guy gets sad and thinks the rules. So, but I learned this morning that maybe this is not only a German thing, maybe this is also a Polish thing. But at least we had some Russian and Ukrainian guys around here, and we still have. And so maybe you can not take this everything I say too seriously, because it has to be seen in cultural context. So, who am I? As you already heard, my name is David, which is the easy part. The last name is Császár. So I'm also half Hungarian. And the Hungarians, in my opinion, are known for being very straight and very minimalist. And this combined with being German, so very strict about rules, is the worst combination you can get ever. But still, you can find a job in an IT company, and that is the company I work for. It's called InfoPark. It's a company located in Berlin. It's a small company, about 60 people. And the company itself is in existence since the 90s. And what we're building is web applications, web services, websites, and products around this. So we have customer relationship management software, and we have a big deal of content management systems. And our latest brand is the Scoobido brand, which is known in the Rails community for being basically the only practicable, I don't know how to say it, the only CMS that really integrates into Rails. We have not always been using Ruby on Rails. When I started, we had been using Java, but we decided that Java was not good enough for our needs. We needed to get more agile, and so we moved to Ruby on Rails, and currently we're also integrating more and more of JavaScript. So this is me. I've been working there since 2002, and well, basically this makes me a senior developer. I also recognized from Guillermo's talk that you can detect that you are a senior developer when you still know prototype.js. So, and we've been working with that too. So to give you an idea what this talk is going to how you have to sort this, it's more in this column of the GrillJS website. So it's not a technical talk. It's not about a framework or product. It's more about the tool and how you can use the tool to improve your development process. So there is a very fast zero-time version of this talk, which goes as follows. Raise hands, everyone who is already using RUBOCOP. Okay? Like sanity check, raise hands if you're not using RUBOCOP. Okay. We have at least 1.5 guys not using RUBOCOP. So, well, let me ask you something else. I guess when you know RUBOCOP, you also know the Ruby style guide. Who has not read the Ruby style guide yet, which is a public repository on GitHub? So okay, this is the one every one of you knows. So let's base on that. The 1 minute of this talk is basically for those people who don't use RUBOCOP yet. Check out RUBOCOP, just Google it, you'll find the repository on GitHub, you'll find the README, you'll find a very nice documentation and like hints on best practices and stuff, and just be happy with it. So now for the long version. Maybe. I'm using like 2 different computers here, which I think I'm getting used to. So let me give you like a little bit of my experience, what I went through at InfoPark in regards of coding conventions and RUBOCOP. So let's start 15 years ago when I sent my first commit to a project in InfoPark. After I committed my code, my manager sat down with me and said, Dave, I've had a look at your code and it's very nice, so functionality and code-wise, but I discovered some small issues. And these issues were like you are using tab stops, while we are using 2 white spaces, 2 single spaces. Or you are using like single line ifs with no block, but we prefer using ifs with block for this and that reason. And at this point, I discovered that coding conventions matter. That coding conventions is something that exists and something that you have to be aware of when working in a team. Before that, of course, I had an idea, like an intuitive idea of coding conventions. Of course, I had my own coding conventions. I had like copied them from the books I read and maybe just configured my editor to fit me best. But of course, this didn't work anymore in a team. And in the course of the years, I went through several teams, and we every now and then a new employee joined the company, and we were changing the frameworks we're using, we're changing the languages we're using. And every now and then we had a discussion about coding conventions. It was like discuss, our screens got bigger and we now can maybe drop the 80 column line limit, or maybe we're using this new programming languages which is called Ruby, and the community says this and that about like single tick quotes, double tick quotes. And well, basically when you start to discuss coding conventions, I think it's a good topic for like a lunch break talk. But I've learned that it's not a good topic to discuss during work, because you end up like with listening to 10 different opinions, and basically if you look closely, everyone's right, because everyone has its own experience, his own background, and there's no use in arguing. It's like arguing about religion. You can't argue about religion, you can just accept it. And well, 1 year ago, we were at this point again. We had switched a little bit of the teams internally, and we got some new employees, some new interns, students, and I was working at in two different teams at this point in time. And because I had to review code by the new employees and talk with them and answer their questions about our coding conventions, well, I tried to do that. But when I remembered the last discussion about coding conventions I had something in mind, and I had to look at our code, and I discovered that these didn't match. So I brought up the topic in a meeting. That meeting was exactly in this room to my colleagues. And normally my colleagues laugh at me for being overly picky, but in this case they agreed, and they said, let's do something about this. And I expected something like, let's write down our coding conventions so new people can just read them up. But they came up with something different. And this was RUBOCOP. So for the guys who don't know RUBOCOP yet, a short introduction. RUBOCOP is a static code analyzer. You can also call it a linter or a code style checker. These kinds of tools exist for basically all programming languages. It's a very old concept. And RUBOCOP is, you can install it as a gem, and you can run it as a command line tool, and it will just check all your source code files against a set of rules. And there are, in this case, RUBOCOP calls the rules cops, just if you read this in the docs, and there are hundreds of them. And according to your configuration, it will, like a test will give you a green outcome or like errors and warnings. RUBOCOP will do the same. It will say everything's fine when the rules match your code, and it will say there's an error in your code, it doesn't match your rule, or I do warn you about, like, maybe there's an issue with this line of code. It is in existence since 2012. It was written by Božidar Batzov, who is Bulgarian, as far as I recall. So obviously, it's not only Germans and Polish people who care about strictness. And so now you know what RUBOCOP is, and everyone else, of course, is already using it. Let me remind you, or like give you some idea about how to use RUBOCOP, how to maybe not use RUBOCOP. What I would like to achieve, that you have to keep in mind just what to think about when talking about coding conventions and when using RUBOCOP. These are just 3 different angles from that you can approach the topic. First, you have to choose and decide which rules you would like to apply. And well, there are already existing rules. Of course, when you install RUBOCOP, you get a default rule set. The default rule set is the rule set which is defined by the Ruby style guide, because the Ruby style guide was also initiated by Batzov. But when you read the style guide, it already says, okay, we have this set of rules. These are the rules that we agreed on, but there are other rules that there is no agreement on, and we just chose one way to set the rule. So maybe your idea about conventions doesn't match, or maybe you have existing code which doesn't match. So there are others. For instance, you can check out the style guide of the GitHub guys. GitHub guys released a style guide for Ruby, including a RUBOCOP configuration file. Or you could check out, there's also a open source project which tries to provide a RUBOCOP file for the Rails guys coding conventions, and who's also very good at publishing their coding conventions is Airbnb. They have basically very good and in-depth coding conventions for all the languages they use. Unfortunately, they don't provide a RUBOCOP configuration yet. But in the end, you can just mix and match and find the one which suits your project, your team, your company best, which is the other of the 3 aspects that I'd like to point out. Just a second. The other aspect is, have a look at the team and the project you are working on. Let me start with InfoPark. InfoPark has no company-wide coding convention. This is because we have very different units, we have very different projects, and very different people working on the projects. And so it's not practical for us to have, or not even useful for us to have a company-wide coding conventions. Then we have small teams in some projects. And as Jan and others pointed out in their presentations, you have to find the right match for the size of your project, the size of your team. And for instance, we have for Screwido, we have the backend team, which for the last 3 years basically consisted mostly of the same 2 guys. And these 2 guys were reviewing their code mutually, and basically they have the same mindset, and they don't need a tool to check their conventions, because these people are the conventions. This might change when another guy comes into the team, but it's not yet the case, so they don't care about it. Another example is a website. A website has, like for instance, the Screwido.com website. We were at that point last year when the issue came up, where we had, basically I was maintaining the website, and we threw in like 2 students to do like little additions and bug fixes and cleanups and stuff. And we wanted to answer their questions about coding conventions, but we don't want it to assert a very high degree of maintainability, and so we decided to go for a relaxed Ruby style. The relaxed Ruby style, I forgot to mention this, is this one. When you Google relaxed Ruby style, you will literally end up on a website with this name, and what they provide you with is a RUBOCOP configuration, which has the main rules intact and the arguable rules disabled. And this was a very good starting point for the website project, because we could easily remove the violations, and then you could go on hacking, and basically you couldn't make the easy mistakes. And then we have the product development team, and the product development team has a very different requirement regarding maintainability, because they have a very high level of very high service level, and they also have a very huge, they have a large team. It's about 6, 7 to 8 people. Because it's so large, it happens more often than a new team member comes in, maybe changes from another unit within the company, and we have a lot more commits. We have, when you have so many people working, you get about 2 pull requests every day with, let's say, 3 to 30 commits each. And of course, the potential for style violations in these cases is much higher, and we wanted to maintain the code even under these circumstances. So what we did there was basically take the default rule set of RUBOCOP, which is very strict, and try to adhere to that. Maybe we changed 2 or 3 things, and we excluded the legacy stuff because it would have taken too much time to fix the issues there. But for new code, we are fine with that. The third way to think about how to use RUBOCOP is what kind of project are we working on? I just said, or not what kind of project are we working on, but at what point in time should we enforce the rules? I stick with the product development team for the first example. As we don't want to get messy code into the master branch, what we decided for is put an automatic RUBOCOP check into the development chain. And if you remember Michal's slide from yesterday, where he had these levels of confidence where the code went through, at stage 2 there was continuous integration, and there was a small line under this which was called lint, and this is exactly what we do. So what we do is when you send a pull request, the continuous integration tests run, and also the style checking runs. So the guy who made the pull request can check after the run, or gets a notification if the well, if the tests are green, and also if the code is green. So, and if anything is wrong, he can just fix it and then just resend the pull request. And the maintainer can always rely on a green, pull request marked green by GitHub has only to be checked for like the content, like is the code good and does it what it's supposed to be. But this is okay for a product and for like a closed source product because well, basically our backend code or even our front-end code should not be messy at any point in time, or people well, should never deploy something like that. But there are other kinds of projects, and let's imagine you have an open source project, and you want contributions to come in. And probably each of you has its most favorite open source project, and you just have to take a look at the pull requests which come in. And I see a lot of this kind of pull requests which goes like the maintainer asking a question. Like, could you please explain why you did this way? Or could you please add a test? And at this point in time, literally all of these pull requests die. There's no one ever answering and nothing happens. And if you add another obstacle, like an automatic cold style check, then you scare off even more people. So you should think about not doing this. Apart from, as I've heard, there are even projects which publish different style guides than their RUBOCOP check says. But of course you can try to keep a level of style in your repository. For instance, you could just accept a pull request from a guy which doesn't follow your coding conventions, and then after you merge it, you can just run RUBOCOP, which has also a very nice autocorrect function which works in a lot of cases, and then just send another commit and then you're fine. The last exception I would like to point out is take a look at the domains that people fill in your project. Our example is we have, for our product development, we have a designer who does all the, well, basically, yeah, the UI design and stuff. And the designer has got its own or his own domain, and which means we don't include the design stuff in the style check. So of course we could check the templates, we could check the CSS, but we don't do it. Because as this guy who is contributing to an open source project with a different mindset, the designer has also a different mindset. The designer just wants to make things nice and shiny, and he's got his own tools, he got his own workflow, and we don't want to block him in his way of doing things. So we excluded this design area from all checks, and he can send pull requests which basically never can go red. And when we merge them, we have to take care of what he produced and integrate this into our code and make our tests happy. So this is going to be a little bit of a summary or maybe bracket. When using RUBOCOP, take a step back from time to time and look if you are using it in your favor. You're probably not using it right when each of your pull requests ends with a commit that says RUBOCOP sucks. Just think about this. Okay, now it's your turn. As you are all using RUBOCOP, and I've already discussed with some of you guys, so maybe you can add something I didn't mention, or of course you can ask me questions. Go. Yeah.
I have like a English question, but nothing to share. Yeah, so like we had some similar issues, like having a big project and various code styles, and I think we spent a lot of time going through Ruby style guide and like deciding whether we want to accept each rule or not. And eventually we will have our own like RUBOCOP configuration, and it's like all fine. But there is also the other way, and I think that's the way like the JavaScript community adopted recently with standard. So there is this standard thing you install. You don't agree with some of those rules, but you still accept them, and like everyone is equally annoyed by this tool, but at least there are the same standards. It's the same with Golang, where they build the formatter in the language, so that's like another approach you can take. And then like cut the flame wars on style. So consider this as well.
So this is basically an argument for just using the default rule set. I can add something else. When you just mentioned the JavaScript community, we also have JavaScript tests, and this is maybe another thing I can warn you about, because you can probably also integrate RUBOCOP very tightly. Last week we had a discussion about our ESLint configuration, and what we did is like integrate ESLint, which is basically the same which RUBOCOP does for Ruby for JavaScript, into the local developers toolchain, which does in real time do the transpilation and sends the code to the browser. And we had one team member who complained, hey guys, I just wanted to do some prototyping, and basically every line of code I wrote made the linter unhappy, and so I couldn't test, like I couldn't write my code, and this is a valid complaint. So you should be very careful at what point in time you intercept the developers' work with like style checking, because I think most of the developers like try to make the test screen or try to implement the functionality and then care after making it look shiny. Yeah, okay. I know we had a lot of discussions yesterday, so maybe we already discussed this stuff, and I also accept that you're like at the end of the conference are through. So last words from me. Those who still didn't notice, InfoPark is hiring. We're always looking for Rails developers and JavaScript, React, and everything. Berlin is a very nice city, but we're also able to make something out working remotely. And the last unrelated story, or maybe a little related story, the last time when I was in Poland was when I was really in Poland, not at the border to grab some sausages, was when I was a child on a field trip, and I went broke like 2 days before the end of the field trip, and so I took my last T-shirt, which was one like this, maybe another color, and took it to a clothes shop, and I met a nice old lady who bought it from me for, at this time, I think it was 1,000 zloty. It's not much at this time. It was not much, but it helped me to survive the last 2 days. So this time, we also brought T-shirts. There are still some left out there. If you didn't get one yet, just grab one. Have fun with them, wearing them. Remember InfoPark, remember Screwito, and remember RUBOCOP. Thank you very much.